Okay, we are all set.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. With that, I will go ahead and call the December 2024 meeting of the Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board to order. My name is Keith Norris. I am the chair of the advisory board, and we will start off with a roll call, starting with Vice Chair Dylan McDowell,
Present.
Alan Alexander,
Here.
Mauricio Flores,
Here.
Zachary Hammerly, Al Holland,
I'm here.
Joan Lloyd,
Here.
and Debbie Miller is going to be late, I believe. All right, so that is a quorum. And we've got a full agenda today. We will start off with review and approval of the minutes from our November meeting. I see Councilor Varney has joined as well. We'll note her.
Thank you.
I move that we adopt the minutes as presented.
Second.
Excellent. Motion by Dylan, second by Al. Any discussion on those minutes? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Minutes are approved. Next up is public comment. Is there anybody in the room?
No.
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 Okay.
We did get public comment via email.
The two letters.
Yeah, those 2 letters, just like that.
Okay. Dylan, do you want to summarize those for the record? I don't have it.
I can pull them up again real quick. Oh, look at that. Printed. We had one public comment, first sentence. I hope the committee will address the policy about not regularly keeping open the new 8-door toilet by the picnic shelter in Riverfront Park. And then there's consideration of the reasoning there. And then the second one, that was from John Lubens. And then we have another from Michael Slater. And concerns about park system is out of alignment with Salem's voters' willingness to fund the system, and referencing the failure of the payroll tax and other funding challenges in the short term. And so looking at really having SPRAB be more involved with the funding conversations is kind of, I think, one of the big takeaways, although I'm oversimplifying. And so I would note that I think this secondary public comment is very in line with conversations we had about specifically having the chair and vice chair as the kind of like de facto members of budget conversations participating with staff. So I would just say, I think this public comment resonated with me in the sense that we were talking about that at our last meeting. And I think this is a good focus point for us as we look at planning for the next year, of which I won't be here, but it's a good way to set up the chair and vice chair.
Agreed. Thank you very much for bringing those into discussion. Any discussion on any of those items?
I think it's worth noting that Mr. what's his name? Lubens, John Lubens, visiting professor from the University of Latvia, was the one who commented on the bathrooms in the park. And I wondered about the same thing. He put it in writing, but we've built this very nice, expensive 8-door restroom facility in the park, and it's not being used because it's locked up all the time. I know maintenance and vandalism is a problem, but I sure hope we could make it more convenient for our users to be able to relieve themselves privately. So we all are sharing this concern, and I don't know what the solution is, but I'm glad that it's brought up. Thank you.
Keith, if you don't mind, you can't see staff, so if they're raising their hand, do you mind if I help you call them?
Go for it. Manage the room there, Dylan. Thank you.
Jen has her hand up to respond.
No, I just wanted to respond. So the restrooms are open during the day when park staff are working. So park hours, park is closed from sunset to sunrise. And so at that time, we lock the restrooms and close them. But during the day, they are open when staff is there. So I'm not sure when the gentleman was at the park and visited, but if it was during those day hours, unless it's closed because a maintenance issue or something, that they're open during the day.
Great, thank you, Jen, for that clarification. Any other discussion on those comments we received? Alan.
Yes, thank you. I also would like to weigh in on Mr. Slater's letter. I found it interesting. I found it pretty informative and very well written. I think there's some interesting points in there that we may want to look at even closely in the future ourselves. I think he hits at some things that it's the sort of the soul of this board when it comes to SPRAB. And I think it just speaks again about the importance of SPRAB and where it's best position in the city structure is. And so I think we ought to spend perhaps some time on that again in the future on that letter.
Great, thank you. All right. No further public comment. Nobody's walked in the last 3 minutes. We will move on to Counselor Varney, and Counselor Varney, we've got a few minutes on the agenda if you have any updates for us as well.
Did you want something in addition to the governance thing? I'll just go up and do the governance.
Yeah,
Okay.
go for the governance thing.
Okay. That's a good update. I'll just come up here in front of everybody.
Also, while you're walking up there, I'll note that Debbie did join us. Debbie Miller did join us as well in the room. So thanks, Debbie.
Okay, I wanted to chat about something that came up at a council meeting on the 2nd. And it has to do with governance of boards and commissions. The way this governance assessment implementation update came about is we have a boards and commissions appointments committee made up of counselors, and their role is to make the recommendations for the vacancies on the boards and commissions. And over the last year or so, as they have tried to take the online applications and review them and get them lined up and make their recommendations, there were some areas, some things that popped up that were either concerns or efficiency issues or whatever. And so they wanted to get an assessment of the whole process and see if we could become more efficient. So one of the challenges is filling these board and commission appointments. The online applications did not adequately address the specific qualifications for some of them. And also one single application could be used for multiple boards and commissions. So it was a little confusing. They also felt there was a need for equity and a broader representation on boards and commissions. They felt that we should evaluate the functionality of boards and commissions, whether they were serving the purpose they were set out to. And then, so as a result of these questions that came up, they requested that Moss Adams complete a governance assessment of these governance groups, the boards and commissions, and also then expand it to neighborhood associations and also our city charter, which hasn't been updated for a really long time. Okay, next slide, please. So they provided a presentation and I stole some slides off of it. So I just wanted to talk about the project. I kind of mentioned that. It's okay, you can just leave it there. Okay, project overview. So they decided to move forward with this governance assessment process. Go on to the next one. It's okay, because I just covered most of that. Okay, and what they ended up doing is on December 2nd, after Moss Adams had gone through and done an assessment, that assessment was brought to the boards and commissions appointment committee, and then those recommendations were brought forward to council. And so these are some of the recommendations. First of all, on council policies for boards and commissions, they addressed 3 areas: the reporting and work plans, liaison assignments, and governance group review. Next slide, please. And SPRAB is so far ahead, and actually just the beacon and the basically the template that they're following for a lot of this. I wanted to say that. I mean, after looking at the work plan and the packet, et cetera, I mean, this board has done amazing things. So first of all, an annual report and work plan framework, which you already do, the annual report and the work plan. Just a couple of things. They want to require annual reports from all boards and commissions. And then work plans from ones that have, that focus on, that have specific priorities and things that they work on. And then the annual report framework like yours would be basically priorities, meeting metrics, and accomplishments. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the liaison. We have 3 liaisons right now, currently. I am a liaison for SPRAB, and Councilor Nishioka is a liaison for the Airport Advisory Commission and the Downtown Advisory Board. And so they like that idea. Thank you again, SPRAB. And so one of the recommendations is to develop council policy for liaisons when they could possibly help with that communication. Okay, next one. The governance group review framework. First of all, the recommendation was to establish the policy to set standards for the review of these governance groups. And so there were 3 basic areas when looking at a group. Consider consolidating it where reasonable, or consolidating multiple groups, I should say. Sunsetting, looking at whether they were still useful and providing the information that was needed. And then lastly, should they add additional groups if there were a distinct purpose that was not currently being met? So the next slide, please. So an example of a proposed group consolidation was to combine our 3 urban renewal advisory boards into one group. And we have the West Salem Urban Renewal Advisory Board meets monthly, for example. The other advisory boards do not. They have a similar purpose, but they operate a little bit differently. So the goal, for example, with this would be, since they share similar purposes, to combine and then downsize, but retain some of the specific positions like the finance and banking representative, the real estate representative, and then members at large. And then as we possibly there's a greater need for other urban renewal areas, we could expand that group. Or when, for instance, these 3 urban renewal areas are almost at the end of their lifespan, those could be combined and reorganized. But that's an example of the consolidation that they're looking at. Okay, next one. So in response, staff actions to do as a result of these recommendations is to implement standardized bylaws and then work on the application, on the online application. Okay, next one. So by bylaws, these would be bylaws for the boards and commissions, and then probably look at them also for standardization of bylaws for the neighborhood associations. And what's really crucial here is conduct and ethics. Let's see. Well, yeah, that was a big one that was brought up, so that there was a rule to follow. Anyway, I think that's probably a good idea to have standardized bylaws for all of our groups. Okay, next slide, please. And then for the application, in order to look at diversity, representation, these are some of the things that they were recommending that we possibly look at. Limiting applicants to apply for one group per application, being able to link reference documents, make sure we have ward, gender, race, ethnic background. And so I think those are all really, really good additions of things that we could do. Okay, so at the December 2nd meeting, the council voted to approve all of these recommendations except for the consolidation of the URAs right now, because there hadn't been there had been very little communication with the urban renewal agency boards about this process, and so we held off for a while. So that's pretty much what I just wanted to kind of fill you in on something with council. This is moving forward. This is gonna be an ongoing process well into 2025. Especially, I'm looking forward to the charter review. I think, when was the charter in the 80s? Is that when it was last approved?
It's been a while.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Probably too long.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions? Just wanted to provide an update.
I have just one question. Well, first, glad to hear Sprav is the shining light there. I appreciate, and
is.
especially with your time on Sprav, I think we've all worked really hard to make sure that we are as effective as possible. My only small note that I would just ask that you think about with future adoption is the limiting one application to one board, just because as I understand it, the problem we have right now is not too many applications, it's too few. And so, applications themselves are very burdensome. And so when I think about equity, diversity, inclusion, and thinking about who's going to actually fill them out in the first place, one of the barriers is people aren't filling them out. And so if you're now requiring people to just have to fill it out every single time, to me, that's a much bigger barrier than anything. And so at least having it be a saved application, maybe you have to intentionally go back in and say, I want this applied to another one because I didn't get on. But I think if you ask someone to recreate it from scratch and all that information is mostly evergreen for a lot of this, it just seems like you're making it much harder than you need to.
Well, that's a really good suggestion, and I agree with you. Almost like you have a base one and then you have specific ones that apply.
Exactly. It might be like, if you apply for Sprout, there might be a question of, do you have like arborist experience? And maybe there's a different essay or something for that or short answer, but then you keep your core kind of login or whatever it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just relieve that we are looking into kind of the efficiency of the process, only because from my experience this year. When I submitted the application, I heard nothing for a couple months, to the point where I just assumed, okay, I'm not gonna hear back. And I went and accepted a position with the state board. And then a few weeks later was approved to come with Salem Park, so I committed to both, but it does create some pain there along the process there, so.
Sure.
Reviewing the efficiency, I mean, that there is something to be looked at.
Definitely part of that process and streamline that process a little bit so they can line up things and get those recommendations out sooner. That's a really good suggestion too.
And Counselor, my question, you said the council approved the recommendations, aside from the one. I guess what does that mean for next steps? Is there a staff or council subcommittee that's working on standardizing the bylaws? Is that something that's is there any work out of those recommendations that comes to us as SPRAB or to each individual board and commission, right? Some of those things could, and I just wonder kind of what's the vision of, I assume approval means, yeah, these all sound great, let's find a way to move forward on them. And I guess I wonder, has anybody decided what the way to move forward on those is?
Oh, thank you for the question. That's a really good question. I'm not sure the boards and commissions appointment group they're gonna keep working with Moss Adams, I believe, right? Manager Staley, and keep working on them with staff, and I'm sure these things will be brought forward. I don't know what will be brought. I'm not sure what will be brought, but I appreciate that point so that I can bring it up if necessary. I mean, when it comes up.
Sounds good.
Sorry about that. I had you shut up. Okay. Anyway, let's see, what else did you address? No, just that ongoing communication. As I said, this is not just because we approved the recommendations to that point. It was to move forward with the process. It's not finalized like the actual parts that were listed for what goes on the application or what the particular bylaws are. So it's ongoing.
Perfect, thanks. It seems like a good list of steps to take, and looking forward to seeing what comes forward of it.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
All right, next up, I believe we have the city manager, Keith Staley here to talk about revenue for the city.
Hey, thank you, Keith, and thank you to the Parks Recreation Advisory Board for allowing me to attend your meeting and provide you with a status report on where we are from a budget and revenue perspective. If you're paying attention at all to local news, I hope you've heard at least the top level report of things are not good. Yesterday in the Statesman Journal, they had a nice little article there summarizing kind of where we are with the $17.69 million budget shortfall and what that means for our organization and our community. So if you want more details, feel free to refer to that or to send me an email. This conversation is extraordinarily important, probably the most important conversation that we will have as a community for the next 10 years, because it's going to have that sort of impact on our community and our organization going forward. We're very much at a fork in the road, and we've managed through skill and luck to push off having to make some very difficult decisions about our organization and our community. And frankly, next year, we will not have that luxury. We will not have that ability just to push the decision further down the road. Rob, why don't we roll over to the next slide? When I'm out and about, and you are not the first group that I've spoken to, I've been out to talk to neighborhood associations and to other boards and commissions and to community groups in regards to this question. And when I'm out and about, I often hear questions about, well, why has the city so poorly managed its budget to end up in this terrible situation? And I can assure you that this is not the result of mismanagement and poor judgment on the part of the city or on the part of any other municipality in the state of Oregon that's currently suffering a very similar fate as we are. Here on the slide, you can see there's just a couple of local examples. You don't have to drive far to experience the commonality of pain that our fellow local governments are experiencing across the state of Oregon. There's some very few exceptions in the state. Maybe like Lake Oswego and Happy Valley, they may be okay, but all of the rest of us are struggling. I meet with 7 other city managers every quarter. We get together virtually, and once a year we descend on each other's communities and spend time with one another. They're all struggling with the same thing. In fact, the city of Eugene was looking at a fire operations fee just yesterday, and their council put off making a decision about that, and they're looking at a $20 million budget shortfall next year. So we are far, far from alone. For those of you who are not following your local government history, Measures 5 and 50 were local initiatives, were statewide initiatives that were enacted in the 1990s that severely curtailed local government's ability to raise additional revenue from ad valorem taxes. And also it artificially constrains the level of value as new properties come onto the tax roll. They are artificially constrained below the market value, in some cases 40 to 60% below the market value. So you have a $1 million property coming on to finishing and coming onto the tax rolls. It's coming on at somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000, depending on exactly what it is. And that's what they pay taxes on literally going forward. And it increases at 3% per year in perpetuity. Unfortunately, the cost of business for the city has exceeded 3% per year. Our increase in cost has exceeded 3% per year. in the inflationary environment that we were in for the last few years, it exceeded the 3% by a factor of 2, at least. So that constraint automatically builds in a gap into our funding stream, a gap between our revenues and our expenses. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So we have started the conversation with the Budget Committee. Just a couple of weeks ago, we presented a preliminary financial forecast to the Budget Committee. We do a 5-year financial forecast every year. Generally, we come into the Budget Committee the first week of January and we present the financial forecast. This year, given what we saw ahead of us, we said we need to get in front of the Budget Committee sooner. We came in on October 30th and presented this information to the Budget Committee and started that conversation with them and started the conversation with them also about considering alternatives. As you can see here on the slide, this is our 2026 budget year. That's next year. The $17.69 million is what we're estimating as the difference between our anticipated expenses and our anticipated revenues. And given that it's red, that means it's bad. And as you can see, at no point does it turn green. So it doesn't get better. There's no like, oh, if we just wait another year, everything will resolve because, some great thing's going to happen. We're going to find a pot of gold under a rainbow or whatever. My job as the city manager is to prepare the annual budget and present it to city council. My responsibility and the responsibility of the finance department is to prepare a budget based on reasonably foreseeable circumstances. And the foreseeable circumstances that we have in our preliminary 5-year forecast indicate that we're going to be operating at a 17, almost $18 million deficit next year. Yes, that's fine.
Sorry about that.
No worries. It was time for me to move on. So, what have we done over the course of the last year? We went out with a payroll tax last year, and it failed spectacularly. It failed by 83%. That is a very strong signal. It says, you did something wrong, you missed the mark, and we understand that. And where we are today is coming back and saying, well, the mark wasn't really missed with the payroll tax. It was more a matter of, maybe method or choice. But the reality is we still have a budget shortfall. And the payroll tax was intended to address that shortfall. Had it gone into effect, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So here we are again, with again the same shortfall, but we're taking a different tack this year and this time, and we're looking at what our options are. We, as we went through the 2025 budget process, Councilor Varney will remember this well. We struggled with making small reductions. You were here. You know that part of those reductions were parks and recreation, things that we love and enjoy. Cultural programs, movies in the park, splash pads, irrigation in our neighborhood parks. Those are all really important elements of quality of life. Library hours of operation and staffing were also on the table. Council saw and heard the concern and said, okay, what are our options? We had $1 million in our transient occupancy fund, and it was there as a result of ARPA dollars. And we said, okay, we can pull out $1 million out of there, and we'll just have fewer dollars for maintaining other facilities going forward. And we use them to backstop these cultural programs, the splash pads, the movies in the park and the like. But we don't have that $1 million again, next year. There actually is $1 million left in that ARPA fund in TOT. But the maintenance requirements on our historic structures haven't gone away, and there's lots of other needs for those dollars as well. So, but we learned that whatever we do, whatever cut we propose, whatever reductions we propose, there are going to be met with, oh my God, not that, this, not the library, police, not the police, library, not, Parks and Recreation. There's always going to be the other program, and there's never going to be an easy way forward. We then had the Revenue Task Force. They convened in January and made a final report to City Council in July, on July 15th. That report basically found that, guess what? There's no silver bullet, there's no magic, there's no pots of gold at the end of any rainbows, and that there's a few sources that are likely to do what you need to do, and that's probably some sort of levy. Council heard that and authorized staff to go out to the community and do some polling. We did that in September, the week of September 15th. We heard back from the community, and frankly, the results weren't encouraging. 40% of the respondents said, I'm really not interested in paying any more taxes for any service. So, thanks for calling. And then in total, about 43% of the people said, maybe yes, 14%, said almost certainly. Total about 43%, 44% said, maybe yes. But clearly there was a clear majority that thought that funding levy for whether it's community services, parks, recreation, library, or for public safety was not going to be feasible. So that obviously puts us in a tight space. But it doesn't change the conversation. We still have the need. And as we advance through the year and we start looking at initiating our budget process, I become more and more uncomfortable with the notion that I'm going to have to balance a budget with a $17.69 million shortfall without having asked the community whether or not that's really what they want to experience. So here you can get some idea about what we ask about. We asked about a range of different options ranging from 75 cents to $1 and some change. $1 levy would generate about $14 to $15 million in additional revenue. So certainly impactful. Should it pass? Obviously it's an impactful revenue source. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so community survey, talked about that, 5-year forecast. We talked about that, principles and priorities. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So as I said, one of my jobs is to prepare the annual budget. And we being the leadership team follow some rules in regards to preparing that, or some guidelines or principles. And the first, of course, is we have to comply with the law. We have to base it on reasonable and likely information. It has to balance. Our revenues and expenses have to balance, and it has to be approved by City Council before July 1st. If we don't, we have some very, very big problems. Probably the state would come in and take over our governance. So let's go to the next slide. Several more principles that I use as I approach the budget. We stay focused on advancing our community's vision. What is our strategic vision? That helps us guide where we want to go. What are the most important issues in front of our community? We will not be starting new services, certainly not in the city manager's budget. Starting new services, we are not in that business. As our cost for labor goes up, we're going to be hard pressed to add new people, let alone new services. If we can't provide a service, we probably shouldn't do it well, or we probably shouldn't do it at all. At some point, every service has a point where it just no longer makes sense to be in that service. The police chief earlier this year came to that conclusion in regards to downtown bicycle patrols. That unit in his shop had through attrition and through the need to put officers into responding to 911 calls, it had reduced to 3 officers and a sergeant. And the chief just no longer felt like that was a viable downtown bicycle patrol and closed it and moved those officers into patrol. So they will now be responding to 911 calls and part of the rotation there. Just by way of example, use one-time revenues for one-time cost. Again, we try to avoid, all right, we're going to use this one-time cost. And frankly, from my perspective, I have sort of the same thought about public safety in general, not using one-time cost to fund ongoing operations. Let's go to the next slide. Of course, you know, we always aim to be good stewards of the community's tax dollars. We do that by constantly looking for efficiencies. Jen and Rob and really all of the employees in the city of Salem are extraordinarily good at that. They have been forced, the necessity is the mother of invention. They have been forced over time to get more and more efficient. Last month, we had a new employee orientation, new counselor orientation, and Parks came over. And I was talking with the maintenance supervisor, the person who's responsible for mowing all of our parks. And he was just walking me through how over time they've gone from, you know, pushing a lawnmower or riding on a lawnmower to now they have a batwing with 16 feet of capacity and they can mow what he said used to take them almost a day to mow Riverfront Park. They now can do it in what, like 45 minutes. I mean, it was extraordinary. So those constantly searching for those sorts of efficiencies it's really just in our nature. And then taking care of employees. People often say, you know, why don't you just pay people less? Or why don't you just offer them worse benefits? That is not a recipe for a successfully managed organization. We are of the opinion that we would rather have well-paid at market, not above, not below, but at market paid employees who are well-trained and receive reasonable benefits. And that's the tack that we are taking. And we have had those discussions with our union. And again, that is the agreed upon course is that we're going to continue to look for and continue to pay at a market rate. We're also going to continue to look for ways to maximize our service dollars through contracting, through use of technology, things like AI to help us answer the phones or do, you know, routine tasks and that sort of thing. So we're constantly looking at and considering those alternatives. Let's go to the next slide. And then, of course, we're going to continue the community conversation, which is this is part of that conversation. It's part of that ongoing conversation with the community about what their needs and desires are and where we're going to end up. Let's go to the next slide. So 4 clicks. Click. There we go. So that's my graphic innovation there, Rob. That's the extent of my PowerPoint skills there. So when you think about how we're going to move forward, if we're going to move forward towards a revenue solution, what is it going to take? And it's going to take mayor and city council. Thank you for being here, Councilor Varney. But it's going to take it's not going to take a 5-4 vote to move this forward. It's going to take an 8-0 or 9-0 vote in order to move this forward. So we have to have mayor and council on board. We have to have our unions and our city employees on board. If I can't explain this to our city employees in a way that they can support, again, it probably doesn't make sense that we move forward. Boards and commissions and foundations and friends of, I've had a chance to talk to a number of our other boards and commissions and will continue to do so. You are important connections to our community. You are thought leaders and you are people who help form opinions in our community. And I need to be able to explain this to you to the point where you can say, yeah, that makes sense to me. And then finally, our community organizations, things like the Chamber of Commerce and the Home Builders Association, Realtors Association, social service agencies, our neighborhood associations and the like. We have to be in a position where they too are aligned on this. And just by way of example, last year, the city of Gresham passed a public safety levy. It passed in May of this year, this May. And prior to that, the city of Gresham had never passed a levy in the history of the city. So they had a pretty strong track record of, no, we don't want to pay for anything ever. And they came together, all of these 4 different groups came together. There was a highly coordinated, highly directed effort towards passing their public safety levy. And it went from failing in November of 2023 to passing in May of 2024. And the spread was about 20 points. So it can be done. Resistance can be overcome with a very strong and well-coordinated campaign. Next slide. So where are we? We're obviously in here having discussions with our community, with our boards and commissions. We are going to be coming back to City Council on January 20th. They've asked staff to come back to them with options to move a levy forward to the voters in May. And we will be looking for further direction from them on what they're looking for, when they're looking for, what's the scale, and what would be included in that levy. Their direction was to come back with a levy for May that would fund parks, recreation, and libraries. And that's what we'll be coming back to them with, different options around what that might look like. Well, a levy may be characterized as funding parks, recreation, and libraries. It would have a benefit to the general fund by virtue of taking that pressure off of the general fund, putting our budget would go from the revenue side of our budget. It would add, $14 million if it was a $1 levy. So it would substantially reduce our budget deficit and would allow us to probably get into the realm of where we're making fewer cuts, significantly fewer cuts. And again, ultimately, City Council has to decide, and frankly, they have to decide relatively quickly by the end of February in order to have something on for the May ballot. They have to have made a decision by the end of February, pass a resolution. That's me. If you could just click that. Thank you. I am unavailable right at the moment. So, by the end of February, they need to make a decision, the ballot in May. And the reason why May is important, if we wait until November, we wouldn't receive receipts until November of 2026. If we passed a levy in May, we would receive revenues in November of 2025. So it has a very big impact on our budget. During all of this conversation, myself and everybody in this room will be putting together a budget for our 2026 budget. And that budget will reflect no new revenue. So the conversation about what will be cut will be clear because it will be in the budget proposal. And at $17.69 million, I can't say today specifically what the impacts are, but I can say that every single service that is funded by the general fund will be impacted negatively by this. Parks, recreation, library, police, fire, general services, planning, everything that is touched by the general fund will be impacted and will be required to be reduced. So no, at least from the city manager's budget perspective, nothing will go unimpacted. And then, of course, we'll adopt the budget on June 23rd of 2025. If a measure passed on May 20th, we would adjust the budget and probably call the budget committee in for an emergency meeting to add, whatever revenue we had and go forward from there. So happy to answer questions. And yeah, yes, ma'am.
Question. So I don't understand financial stuff very well, but it sounds like we would no longer be in the general fund, the parks would no longer be in the general fund. We would now be paid by the levy.
No, that wouldn't change at all. You would still be in the general fund. The levy dollars would flow into the general fund. Depending on how we wrote the ballot measure, it's still going to be general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I was talking about other Keith, but yes, you as well. I had a question, I guess a couple quick ones. One is you said $14 to $15 million if you did a $1 levy, I guess. But then looking at your early chart, the whole was 17 to start, but then it got into the 20s and high 20s for the deficit going forward. So at one point, I think your 5-year projection had $28 million. So
It does. It still does.
what would you, so if you have 14 million coming in from the levy, where's the other 14 gonna come eventually? Is that still a TBD
Well,
or do we have thoughts?
It's still TBD.
Okay.
But it does grow at 3% per year, and we are looking at some other revenue sources. We're looking at the operations fee and trying to make the operations fee more equitable. Right now, I pay $15.83, and Amazon pays $75 and some change at their 1 million square foot warehouse out on Corbin Road. My sense is that Amazon can pay, more than 5 times than Keith Staley can. Yeah, sir.
Brought up the same subject I was involved with. I met with a few people yesterday, one of whom surprised me in saying that he's been meeting with a bunch of young voters. And the reason that they voted against the previous levy was Amazon. It had nothing to do with paying more tax and stuff, but it was because there's such deep resentment for Amazon being granted a tax abatement to be located here. And somebody claimed to have done some research saying that we've lost some $20 million to the city's revenues because of that abatement. And that even at the time it was introduced, there was a suggestion to reduce it from a 10-year abatement of not paying property taxes down to 5 years. And that was voted against by city councilors. Excuse me. So what seems to be out there is part of the resistance for tax paying and levy resistance has to do with historical exemptions that are still active. Is there any way of making it right with big employers? Sure, they're giving jobs, but if they're not paying property taxes, that's hurting us too. Is there any way of remedying that, or is there anything to be done in that area in the future?
So next year, the Mill Creek Industrial Park, the Mill Creek URA Urban Renewal Area will reach maximum indebtedness, and at that time, it can come off back onto the tax rolls. And that, of course, will be a decision for city council. I certainly will be advocating that it come back onto the tax rolls. If that's added to the tax rolls next year, it adds $244 million to our ad valorem tax rolls, which for the city of Salem generates about $1.5 million in taxes per year. And that's for the entire URA, which includes Amazon and the Dollar General and the other warehouse buildings that are out there. Because we only get a portion of the overall taxes.
So you're saying it will take a city council action to restore them to the tax rolls?
Ultimately, city council has to decide whether or not we are going to continue with the urban renewal area there, add new projects, or are we going to bring it to a close? Again, they've actually authorized some work by Moss Adams, who Councilor was referencing earlier, to look at our entire URA system. McGillcrest came off the books last year. Northgate is, I think, about a year out, and West Salem is also about a year out. So many of our URAs are at the end of their terms and periods, and they will be coming back onto the tax roll, which is, of course, a good thing from a general fund perspective. The one that's not likely to come on to the tax rolls anytime soon, probably anytime in the next 20 years, is the downtown riverfront, which generates, and because of some very unique circumstances related to when that was put into place and changes in laws, it generates a lot of revenue for downtown capital projects. Things like Riverfront Park would not be there if it weren't for the URA. The bridge wouldn't be there. It doesn't. The bad thing about URAs is they do not help operations at all. You cannot pay for any operations, not even for cleaning and maintaining your facilities. You can only build shiny new things.
But Manager Staley, but to emphasize your point there, like you said, they'll be coming back on the tax rolls. But I think, like you said, that Mill Creek will be coming off or coming back on the tax rolls, and at most we're looking at about $1.5 million a year into the general fund for the city. So even to Al's kind of argument, right? Even if we force those companies back onto the tax rolls, or they come back on tax, we're not solving the revenue challenge that we have, right? And there would still be a need for a levy or for some other
Absolutely.
general funding aspect.
Or significant reductions in.
Right. Those elements coming back on the tax rolls doesn't balance the budget.
Oh, no, not far from home. I like to look at things in increments of, a couple $1 million. So a couple $1 million in new revenue from URAs closing out, a couple $1 million coming to us through changes in the operations fee, a couple $1 million coming to us from our new EMS fund, a couple $1 million coming from our friends at the state capitol paying us a payment in lieu of taxes or something similar to that. It starts to add up to, $8 million in additional revenues outside of the ad valorem stream. And then, okay, then what can we put on top of that with a levy to make this work? And of course, there's opportunities for reductions in expenses also, looking at, what services can we reduce? How can we be more efficient? But as I wander around the city of Salem and talk to employees and see how we do our work, the turnip has been squeezed. The blood is very thin. The soup is very thin at this point. We're not sitting on excesses here in this organization in any way.
Would like to reinforce that. While all of that is true, the same thing is true for 35-year-olds and 40-year-olds with full-time jobs that can't afford to buy a house and barely can pay the rent. That differential is dearly being felt, and it's creating such animosity and such resistance to things that almost reason does not get through very well. The education of the voter, the electorate, to what you were just saying. Take them off put them back on the tax rolls, do all you want with that. It'll gain us about 1 million. We're talking 14, 15, 20 million that's needed. And these people think that that's gonna make the difference. So educating people about the quantities and the relief that's coming in some ways and their expenses in proportion to that is gonna be essential to getting support from the voters in order to make it pass.
Yeah, just going back to the Gresham experience, the city of Gresham put $120,000 into that campaign, just sending information out to the community about, what was on the ballot measure, not like advocating. And they also had a political action committee that came together through their unions and some other community organizations that generated about another $120,000 that they put into that campaign. And again, they were successful. They primarily attributed to their success, though, into rolling open the doors of the fire stations, inviting people inside and having a conversation about the change in their call volume and the change in the nature of the services that they're rendering, which we, of course, are seeing as well. 10 years ago, our fire department responded to 17,000 calls. This year, we're on pace to cover 34,000 calls. So, and I'm sorry, Salem, but in Parks and Recreation, you have a role in this. Salem is getting older and it's getting sicker. And as a result of that, we are faced with an ever-growing demand for services, particularly in our fire rescue folks. There. That enough?
Manager Saley,
Yes, sir.
just I guess kind of final question here, and then I do want us to move on to some of the other items on the agenda because I know we got a few other important things to get through. But I guess to your point of kind of all hands on deck and building that community support, is there anything right now at this stage in the process, right? You had that timeline for us, but right now at this stage that we as SPRAB or we as individual members of the community, engaged members of the community could be doing or should be thinking about doing to help advance this discussion and this effort to balance the budget?
I know that there are conversations going on at the foundation level, both for parks and for Center 50+, and also the library foundations. They're having those conversations. I'm sure you'll be drawn into those conversations. Our boards and commissions are prohibited from taking a position formally on any levy. So once the levy is placed on the ballot and we are and you are prohibited from advocating for it. You can provide education and information, but you can't advocate for it. Now, there isn't a question in front of the community, so we can have these conversations. We can talk about, the why and the impacts. But once we get into, if we actually end up with a ballot measure on the ballot, that changes.
Okay, that is good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you, Keith.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't be there to see you in person. All right, next on the agenda, and thanks for that discussion. I think as it's come up, the revenue side has come up a lot in our meetings over the past few months, and I think we'll continue to see it come up. And looking forward to seeing what we can do to engage on that at the appropriate times and appropriate ways. Next up, we have Rob to talk about capital improvement plan. Rob, I know I think Jeffrey and Jennifer are in the room as well, and I know we're running a bit behind, so if you'd rather flip with them at this point, I'd be open to that as well, if they have other things to get onto their afternoon with.
Let's just keep to the schedule. I think we'll get through it.
Okay, keep to the schedule. Capital improvement plan, you're up. Also, we're looking at the podium still on the video.
Okay, great. We'll fix that.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Rob Romanek, Parks Planning Manager. Nice to be here today. As was discussed a couple meetings ago, I have prepared an advance of where Parks Planning is looking in terms of budgeting our park system development charges for both next year's budget as well as the CIP, the capital improvement plan, which is a 5-year funding tool the city has. This is my main slide I have here today that I'm going to go over in significant detail. And then if you have questions about any specific project, I have 40 other slides. I don't intend to show them all, but if you wanted to question one specific project, that was the intention. I can pull that information up. But before I start going over this, a few just big picture items I want to share with you. As was the case last year, Parks Planning staff is proposing no new projects in the capital improvement plan under the system development charge category. So we are simply funding projects that have been on the CIP for at least 2 years, and we're adding no new projects at this time. We're very busy, both engineering and parks planning. So there's an administrative capacity issue we're up against, and that has helped formed this programming scenario that you're looking at. We're delivering the bond funded program. We are preparing to update the park system plan. We have lots of things going on, so that's a factor. Things are generally costing more. Capital improvement projects are seeing an increased cost, and that has having a factor. We're having to contribute more funds to projects to see them through to successful completion, but you'll see that here reflected. We are making, and this relates to the comment I just said, we're actively trying to reduce the gap between when we complete a park master plan and when that first phase of park development occurs. And you'll see that reflected in this as well. And then finally, the elephant in the room, which we've been talking about quite a bit today, is that there's the maintenance aspect. And that's something we think about a lot when we develop this, is that we're developing nice new things, but there's not necessarily a maintenance funding component that goes with it. So with that, this here is the list of all the projects that are slated to receive a contribution of system development charges over the next 5 years. Here on the far right, there is the CIP score. That is a composite score of various criteria that we consider. The CIP committee meets and discusses the project and then scores those individual projects. And you'll see the highest scoring project here at the top is the Gear Park Skate Park project. And then all the way down here, we have a master plan for Hazel Green Park. You'll note that I've highlighted the word development plan. Parks Planning is going to recommend that moving forward, we no longer refer to our specific park development plans as master plans. That's a recommendation we received from some of our consultants. It has to do with inclusivity and just the words matter. So it's similar to the reason why it's coming out of vogue to call the main bedroom in your house a master bedroom. You call it the primary bedroom. It has connotations that we're just trying to be more inclusive and move away from. So that's why that's highlighted. We're gonna call them development plans moving forward. Here at the top of the list, those 2 unscored projects. We have the park system plan update. That is not scored. It serves the whole community. We have not scored that project. It is triggered by the update to the comprehensive plan, and it's happening no matter what. And then the second one here, this project is actually a bond funded project. It's the Gear Park shelter, sport field upgrades, and dog park improvement. And it is scored in the CIP with a score. However, I didn't list it here intentionally. This contribution is what we need to do the artificial turf, that if you recall that discussion earlier in the year. The $120,000 is what we need to essentially take a $3.5 million project and add a little bit more so that we can have a significantly more benefit to the community with that project. Last thing I'm going to highlight here is typically you'll see that we're aiming for a goal of 2.5 million. Historically, that goal, that target fluctuates, but for past few years we've had the 2.5 goal. If we observe that we're seeing SDC revenue coming in faster than we expected, we could increase that in the future year. But at the same time, we could also see a slowing of SDC revenue coming in, and that would also cause us to cut that. So that is basically it's a judgment call that city staff are making at the incoming fees as we think about them going out into projects. you'll see that for next year, we have quite a bit over $2.5 million. That is because we have some projects that are costing more than initially anticipated, and we are programming funds for them. The main one being the skate park, and so I could talk about that in more detail because I'm sure you're interested in that. That funding is coming from what we call below the line. It's the unspecified funding, pot of funding. So you think it's the money that hasn't been programmed. And by spending down that unspecified amount of money, we are basically we're emptying the savings account. So if revenues slow down, we're gonna have less SDCs to spend over time. This is staff's recommendation though. And with that, I can either just jump right into the skate park project, or I could flip through to any project that the board would like to discuss.
Can you just clarify the red boxes?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I skipped over that. The red boxes are projects that as Parks Planning developed this scenario, we looked at the scoring and said that score is something we might want to revisit because there's either been a change in the project scope or there's been a change in the project scope, or there's been a change in the circumstances surrounding the project that could justify rescoring the project, and it would have a different score. In all those situations, I would expect rescoring would result in a much higher score. And let's just talk about those briefly. The first one here is the Gear Park Land Trade and Access Improvement Project. This project was really scoped as only the Gear Park Land Trade. It now also includes a pedestrian connection project. Again, I think that would bump up the scores if it was rescored today. The Bailey Ridge Park Development Project. This project is a priority, a lot to do with taking care of the property. It has a safety issue going on at the site, and I could pull the slides, we could talk about that. I just want to use the time wisely today. That project is a priority in our minds because of that. It's also a priority because there is funding from another pot of money here at the city. There's stormwater funds that are from a different pot of money. They're not general funds, but there is $200,000 available to match our system development charges. So then we're leveraging the SDCs. And then that's why we would say that is subject to rescoring. And then lastly, Fisher Road Park. Again, I think this is a project that has evolved from what it was originally scoped as. And it's a head scratcher for me, frankly. I don't know why it scores so low. In our minds, it is a priority project. The master plan for that project was a very high scoring project. So I simply could not tell you why the score is so low, but we would argue that it needs to be relooked at. And so if you kind of take those three out, you'll see that the score generally tracks its priority in terms of funding.
Okay, so that was gonna be my follow-up question is okay, the scoring is used to say if it scores higher, it gets funding first. Is that?
Generally, that's what you're
And
gonna
those
wanna
see. Those are the
see.
three things that throw that off.
Although those other factors influencing this specific layout, what I just mentioned, it's the, that we're seeing higher costs. If I want to talk about Battle Creek Park development real quick, this is an issue where this project needs quite a bit of engineering. And so it's pushed out simply because the engineers are quite busy. We're delivering lots of capital improvement projects. We're doing a lot of bridge projects with the bond funding. And this essentially is a bridge project. And so they just don't have the capacity to take on another project at the moment. So that's one of the reasons that one's been delayed several years. So there's a number of factors. Do you want me to just slip over to the skate park project, talk about that one a little bit more because of the price tag associated with it, or do you want to?
That's probably fine. I guess, is there, at this point, Rob, what input are you hoping to have for us? Are you looking for input on this?
We are, yes. Yeah, so
what type of input?
Advice on other things that you would want us to see prioritized. Also, if certainly in the skate park project, I want to make sure the board is aware and comfortable with some of the decision making we've done. We are essentially moving forward to deliver the project with all the bells and whistles. We could take a step back and say, hey, maybe this situation we need to cut out some of the elements of the project or stage some of the elements of the project, and that would then reduce this amount of money right here.
So, and what would that reduction in the amount of money accomplish? Would that allow us to then fund other
It would save more money in the savings account, the below the line, the unspecified for future years.
Okay. That's probably a good discussion to have. The only other comment I have is as I think I've mentioned to you before, I really like the goal of reducing the lag time between the development planning and then the actual development of the park. And I guess to that end, I wonder if I see there's 6 more development plans on this CIP. The first one looks like it's starting in 27, but I guess my point is should we continue to do any development planning without the ability to then say, okay, if we do D Street development plan in 27 and 28, maybe we should have funds in there in FY30 to start the development. And it looks like we do. Never mind. Scratch that. That's a few lines down. I had a kid on my lap. I haven't been able to review the whole thing yet. So yeah. So I think I guess my point is yes, I love that initiative. I think that is very important to saving us money in the long run because I know we've also redone some development plans before there was ever any development because there'd been too much time lag and the neighborhood had shifted too much. So I think that's a good effort, and I appreciate that.
Can I throw out just a comment? We'll get to some of the ideas about transportation to parks and kind of that report conversation later, but one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is just the complete streets conversation and looking at like Orchard Heights and the conversations this year about access to that park and sidewalks and turn lanes and all of those. And I know that there are scope questions about where the funding goes, but I do think given that we're coming, the transportation system plan is underway and there's these larger Salem plans, I think these goals would be really good to keep thinking about implementation of these and where dollars need to be aligned in this fiscal schedule, maybe more on the transportation side to accommodate new park development. Like an example I was gonna mention close to my house is Eola Ridge, which I see is on a phase 2 in 28, or maybe 29. And that's an area where, for anyone who lives in West Salem, Burley Hill, people barrel through Burley, and there's no crosswalks, but there's lots of kids in my neighborhood that walk across. There's to get across to actually to school as well. And so that's one I put on that website at one point of being a really high crosswalk need spot, which is relatively low cost compared to like park improvements. But to me, that's a really big access inhibitor on a pretty busy road that it'd be nice to think about how the city can start thinking about we built this new park, renovated the park or improved it. How do we make sure that there's some key access points and have that be a priority that's then flagged for other parts of the city? And yeah, so that's kind of, it's a bigger scope question, but I do think as we're planning this far out and this effectively, we should be thinking about that.
Okay. Yeah, I add to that, the same concern has to do with Pat and Bob and Pat Straub Nature Park in West Salem, has no pedestrian access. And I feel like if we're gonna be talking about 35 years from now, it ought to be considered somewhere unless it's built in that isn't supposed to have pedestrian access. And it just seems contradictory to me that we wouldn't provide people to walk to one of our city parks.
One comment is to a great discussion. I want the system development charges is a tool the city has. It's not the tool to solve every problem. It's actually restricted. There's an eligibility list of only certain parks that are eligible to receive SDCs. That list can be modified by council. But for example, so Eola Ridge is on it's called the 309 list, is on the 309 list. So that's valid. We can definitely look at that. But I think it's interesting. Your point is maybe there is an opportunity to match other funding points.
Because you have like a crosswalk fund or something, right? And so the city has that fund and you have sidewalk funds and there's different things like that. And so what I'm saying is like, yes, you have limitations on these charges, but now how do you all say, okay, we realize there's a crosswalk need here. Maybe that comes up in the development plan process. And then you go to the sidewalk fund and say, can we use some of that money at the same time that of like, we're planning 4 years out, let's make sure there's a crosswalk built in.
That's great. Yeah. Like breaking down the silos and kind of coordinating a little bit better.
Exactly, yeah.
I talk about the skate park. I feel like I should because it's
You built it up. There's a lot of anticipation.
All right, so just real quick, your park, there's Cabildo Pit quite a bit gonna happen at the park in 2025. Number one, here we have a pedestrian connection that I alluded to earlier that's gonna go up to the state hospital's existing sidewalk, provide a new safe pedestrian route from the north, neighborhoods to the north. We're going to be improving or constructing a fenced off-leash dog area. We're going to be improving the 2 baseball fields, make them multi-purpose with the ability to have softball as well by adding artificial turf infields. We're going to completely upgrade the soccer fields with new sub-drainage irrigation systems. And then kind of connecting it all together, we have the skate park and pathway project, which is right here, going to connect the existing park trail to that new sidewalk. Here we go. All right, so are my slides out of order? No, here we are. So the skate park and pathway project, if you looked at the adopted CIP today, you'll see that last year we did allocate $300,000 in SDCs. We knew that the project was short. We just didn't have a sense how short it was. Over the past year, we've done a lot of budget validation with the contractor we have on board for the project, and we have realized that we do in fact need quite a bit more money to complete the project. One thing I'm gonna note here, if you look at the CIP, you will see a clear error in the CIP. So I went ahead and pulled the previous year's CIP so we have a more kind of informed discussion. The project has received a $500,000 grant from the state. And everything else in the 1.9 other than $500,000 has been system development charges. And so then we're gonna add this proposed just over 1.4, and that's gonna bring the total project cost up to over $4.5 million. And what that's buying you. Oh, I'm gonna put this in here real quick. This was a staff report that went to City Council last year when we applied for the grant. And as I wanna highlight this, that we've known for quite a while we're gonna need a last minute infusion into this project. It's just more than we expected. What is that buying you? That's buying you a new paved path connection that's gonna go through the park, as I alluded to. Up here, you'll see the texture on the site plan changes a bit. That's because up here we're doing vehicular paving, which is thicker. That's gonna allow an ambulance or a service vehicle to drive in and turn around here. So if you think there's an injury at the skate park, an ambulance can pull right up. Maintenance vehicles can also access the site. This is the actual skate park itself. I have a concept to show you on the next slide. The skate park has a donut hole in it, which is a very interesting component of its design. In that area, we're proposing concrete pavers and planting areas to provide like a safe zone. You can get out of the action. And you also have some opportunity to plant trees and create some shade in this giant impervious surface that we're creating out there in the middle of the park. Up here at the top, we have some site amenities. You have a picnic shelter. We have skatable features that kind of flow outside of the skate park. We have bike racks, and we're gonna have other site amenities like drinking fountains. We're gonna have solar powered lighting all throughout the walkway as well. That's another component of the project. On the walkway, not the skate park itself.
Real quick clarification, if you go back to that slide. I remember when we were out there, this paved path, the long one, part of that is required by ADA design standards, is that correct, or is that a different part of?
That's absolutely correct. So these, the picnic shelter up here is a structure, just like any building. And so that triggers ADA requirements, and we do need to provide an accessible route to the structure. And so that paved path will accomplish that.
And I feel like that's important, is that it's not, we're not saying it's a nice to have, but we could say, $100,000 by getting rid of the path, we have required, otherwise we'd have to then domino ourselves and get rid of the structure and everything.
That's right, yeah. This is what the skate park actually is going to look like. It doesn't really reflect well on here's more a 2D concept. Lots of people think that's really exciting. It's a lot of people in the Salem skateboarding community are very much looking forward to it. And then real quick, the question is, well, if we had to remove some cost here at the last moment in the project, what could we do? We could scale back this plaza and potentially phase it, and we take out the picnic shelter. That's an idea. We could remove this pathway here on the east side of the skate park, either phase it or remove it from the project. We could scale back this interior element and make it just, some rough seated area. That would create a maintenance issue. We're getting the push mowers back out because we'd have to maintain that spot. But those are the ideas we have. Ultimately, we've decided not to do any of those things, but we're here asking for your input as well as we consider this in the next month or two. I will say, this project's gonna start construction in February, so we are really down to it.
The dotted line going through the bottom section, is that a water line being horizontally?
This
Right
one?
there, yeah. What's
Yeah,
that like?
that's a large private water line. That's a secondary water line to the state's penitentiary. We can't put a stormwater treatment facility on top of it, so that's why it's shown in the plan here.
How much would it save to fade, to stage the building in that other path, the path in this thing?
Yeah, we're in it would be approximately $200,000 to $300,000.
And I'm just curious, I mean, if you do decide to stage it, but you want to build it at some point, it's not gonna be 200.
That's a great point. That's right.
To rebuild it.
Every year we postpone a project, it's gonna add a chunk more money. I mean, we're seeing, best case scenario, 4% more, but realistically more like, we're seeing 10% increase over 1 year.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And you're gonna potentially, if you remove the picnic shelter to get the heavy equipment back in there to rebuild it, you're gonna tear up some of the stuff you already built, and it would add cost in the future years.
It would.
And I guess in that vein, and the Manager Staley's statement about whatever we do, let's do it really well. My thought is press forward with the plan, right? I think this is a great plan. It's a exciting new development at a nice big park. And so that's kind of my initial thought is let's not try to nickel and dime it. Let's do it well.
Why cobble pavers in that center spot?
This has been a discussion for months with our design team. Initially, we were gonna do artificial turf. We felt like that would not hold up with the level of impact to the area. And so the pavers were suggested by the skate park builder, the group that specializes in the skate park. Skateboarders can't roll across it easily. So you'll basically keep them from doing that. They'll have to pull their boards off and actually not use that as an active part of the skating area. And so again, there's been a healthy and robust conversation around this.
From an install cost, it's technical and.
I'm sorry, one more time?
It's more technical to install, so it's trickier and it costs more.
Yes, and we've analyzed it. Yes, that's right. It is the center of the skate park is a very expensive area. Absolutely has. There's gonna be seat wall, there's gonna be seat benches in there, so there's quite a bit going into that area.
About this center area again, has thought been given to the actual edge perimeter of that so that skaters coming to it are gonna be riding that edge?
You're talking about the interior edge of or the exterior edge?
The interior edge of that.
Yes, a lot of thought's been given to that.
So it's gonna be durable.
So yes,
Okay.
yes, hopefully. I'll say the exterior edge of the skate park is gonna have what's called coping. It's gonna be like a metal steel cap on it.
Yeah.
So it's intended to be skated.
Probably something similar on that interior edge might be warranted, I don't know.
And thoughts like that, Al, are part of my thinking about the pathway on the east side is like, well, that pathway will be there whether or not it's paved, right? Like it will be there will be a social pathway there, and I think from the park serving the users well and looking good and functioning well, it makes sense to go ahead and have that pathway there rather than face it in.
Wonderful.
I like it.
So you don't need a motion or anything at this point for more discussion?
Nope, and I just see this will be an annual event. I think it's a good idea. We'll try to make this a normal part of the work plan.
I've got a question about one small item there. You've got Grice Hill Park Development Plan, in FY 29 for what, $500,000? 100,000. Is that to push some kind of walking path around there?
So that it would be, the thought there is over these 2 years,
Yeah.
we would be conducting the what we call the master plan, we're now called the
The development.
development plan
So it's
process.
just planning.
So it's just the planning process and,
Okay.
and the actual development of that park isn't quite on the CIP yet.
That's the property that is being leased to a farmer out.
It's one of the properties being listed for farming.
Yeah, I'm anxious for that to proceed. I think that it will fill a need because that is not far from the area of the other park that you can't even walk to. So it would be a good one to have, where people can walk and get to.
That's good to know, thanks.
One quick suggestion on communicating this is just, there's a lot here, and I wonder if in communicating for the public and council, if you were to map this in some way to show dots of like wards, just to show that it's, you know, some of the criticism, sometimes you're doing it all in one area or not, or you're excluding others, and this is pretty geographically diverse. So I would encourage you to think about having a visual map that shows dots of how this spreads across and really emphasizes that the Parks and Rec conversation is community-wide.
Good thought. Thanks, Dylan. And thanks, Rob. I agree. I think this is a great annual discussion for us to have and for us to be aware of where these investments are coming in. If good with you, in the interest of time, we can move on to the next presentation.
For me, thank you, everyone.
How much time do we have now, Rob?
I'd say it's 20.
Negative 25
Okay.
minutes. but-
Oh, okay, I thought the meeting ended at 2:30, so I was like, oh,
I think we're
rush through this.
I'm Jeff Johnson, Natural Resources Planner here at the city, and thanks for getting us on the agenda to talk about the changes to our land management plan for the Minto Island Conservation Area. It was originally done in 2015, and due to presence of requests for events like Ironman, as well as the fact it's almost 10 years old, we are revising it. And we have been working with Streamscape Environmental. Jennifer Mongolo is here with me. She is the principal ecologist for Streamscapes, and she's done most of the heavy lifting on this project. So I'm gonna let her present the information, and then if you have any questions, please. We'll both of your answer.
I'm so embarrassed. I just realized I edited this presentation and I didn't change the first slide. So if it's gonna be posted somehow, I might make an edit to that before you post it. Go ahead to the next slide. So thanks for having us today. As Jeff mentioned, we're gonna talk a little bit about the Minto Island Conservation Area Management Plan update. I'll provide an overview of the plan, highlight proposed changes, and encourage review and feedback from the council. The plan, did you just say the plan is being posted?
It is posted.
It is posted to the website now. Next slide. And I'll try to go kind of fast because I know this has been a long meeting already. I'll start off with brief site history because it's very pertinent to the plan itself and how we manage the Minto Island Conservation Area. Brief overview of the new document, some key proposed changes, and I'll describe briefly the stakeholder and collaboration process that we've gone through. Next slide. So just to help orient everybody, the property we're talking about is at the very northern extent of Minto Brown Island Park. It's a 307-acre lot. You can access it easily from Riverfront Park by crossing the Peter Courtney pedestrian and bicycle bridge. And there's a paved trail that runs through the park that allows pedestrians and bicyclists to access from downtown Salem, access the vast network of trails in Minto Brown Island Park. Next slide. So like I said, my Minto Island Conservation Area, I'm gonna call it MICA, moving forward. Its historic uses and past management practices continue to shape the habitats and uses of the property today. So I want to run through those briefly. Going back in time to maybe about the 1850s, this is kind of the vegetation communities that would have been present prior to development. This is overlaid on some current imagery, so ignore the current imagery, but it would have largely been riparian forest, the green areas with some willow swamps and large areas of open water. This was prior to the Willamette River being dammed, so it was much less confined river, and the river would have looked quite a bit different than it does today. Next slide. And then beginning in, I want to say, apologize, I'm really bad at remembering dates. I'm going to look at my notes here. Around the early 1930s, as colonization occurred, Salem's waterfront became very industrial. And beginning in 1939, with Jason Lee's mills, and then continuing with major operations like the Salem Flouring Mill, 1987, and the Spalding Sawmill. Those were operations directly across the Willamette Slough, what we know as the Willamette Slough today. Next slide. Moving into up until about the mid-1930s, there wasn't much happening on the conservation property. And then around 1936, we start seeing industrial activities creeping across the slough. And by 1950, we're starting to see the property being used for industrial uses by the mills that are across the waterfront. Next slide. By the next decade, we saw further industrial development, and the property started becoming used for processing spent mill materials. After the Oregon Pulp and Paper Mill sold the property to Boise Cascade in 1962, 2 clay-lined aerated wastewater ponds and 2 landfill areas were constructed on the property, as you can see in the 1967 picture. Next slide. These 1975 and 1980 aerial images show the site's active industrial uses up until the 1980s, including the active wastewater ponds, and that's occurring next to active agricultural areas. And you can still see the infrared imagery really helps you see the remnant riparian vegetation that was still present on the site at that time. Next slide. So after Boise Cascade Mill closure in about 1984, remediation efforts began, and that included draining and dredging the emergency pond, capping it, and reconnecting it to the slough. And then nothing really happened until 2012 when the berm was breached and around the 50 million gallon pond, the square pond was breached, marking the final major remediation step, and also changing the hydrology of those ponds, which used to hold a lot more open water. Next slide. So the city acquired the Minto Island Conservation Area in 2013, following DEQ's, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality's no further action designation. It was acquired with $1.2 million in funding from Bonneville Power Administration, I'll call them BPA moving forward, through the Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program. That program also gave the city $375,000 for stewardship funding, so ongoing maintenance and management of the site. Next. One of the requirements of purchasing a property through the Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program is that you have to put a very strict conservation easement on the property. And that easement has to protect in perpetuity the conservation values of the property and prohibit conflicting uses. Bonneville Power Administration and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife have oversight over the property because of this easement, and they approve everything that we allow on the site, or everything they have to approve ultimately this management plan. The conservation easement prohibits any use that could materially harm or interfere with the conservation values identified in the easement. There's also a couple other documents, a consent judgment and easement and equitable servitudes document that are DEQ documents that have to do with ongoing public safety protections regarding the remediation of the site. And so DEQ also has ongoing oversight over what happens on the property, particularly regarding public use. Next slide. So why is this update needed? We do have, the city does have a current management plan. It was developed in 2015 and has been in use since then. The main driver for this update is really the larger events that the city has started allowing to use the Minto Island paved trail. Specifically the Ironman event, the BPA has allowed that event through special land use agreements for the last 3 years. However, in order for them to continue to allow it and other events as non-conflicting uses of the property, they wanted a fuller assessment and they wanted our plan, the city's plan, to be updated, formally updated. And it's also in alignment with the current kind of the normal timeline of updating plans. It's been almost 10 years since the first plan was developed. A lot of things have changed. We have 10 years of restoration work. We have a new bridge and trail that was developed since then. So it just does make a lot of sense to update the plan now. All right, so the plan looks a lot different. This updated plan looks a lot different than the previous plan because one thing that has changed in the last 10 years is that Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has put forward a template that they want property owners to use when developing management plans. So we are using that new template from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And these are the main sections that are included. Under each of these sections, there's a slew of subsections and information. I won't go into all of that. What do I want to say about it though? It is a very much more detailed document than the previous one. It has a lot more background information. The easement is attached. And it actually, one thing I didn't put in here is in the appendices, we're actually putting the event restrictions as an appendix to the plan, so they're easily accessible, whereas those were previously done separately as an administrative role by the city. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to just go over, like I said, this is a pretty long plan and I hope you have a chance to glance through it. I'll give you some areas to specifically focus on towards the end of the presentation. But some of the main things that are being updated and changed with this plan are habitat reclassification. We shifted the way habitats were described from the original plan to align with the Oregon Conservation Strategy. We also updated them to reflect what the current habitat is after 10 years of restoration efforts and natural succession processes. This plan includes a range of goals, each with SMART objectives. So the objectives have to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So all of the objectives have a timeline attached to them. And then under each objective, there's strategies that are meant to help the city reach those objectives. The plan refines public access and recreation goals and includes a clearer, more balanced approach to managing public access while also continuing to prioritize habitat conservation. It addresses the next stages of trail development and implementation. There's a detailed monitoring framework. The previous plan didn't have any monitoring framework whatsoever, so this is new moving forward. It also is required that we consider climate adaptation. So the plan evaluates how the climate is projected to change over 10, 20, and 50 to 60 year timeframes and how we can manage the property adaptively based on that. And it incorporates the lessons learned from the last decade of managing and restoring the property. We could go to the next one. So I have some visuals for you finally. The updated current habitat map is shown on the left alongside the desired future conditions map. As I said, both of these now align with the Oregon Conservation Strategy priority habitat types. The main strategy habitat types are the flowing water and riparian habitat, and then the wetlands. And then we've subcategorized those by kind of condition and actual, what's really there. So we have forest plantations. It kind of shows you what this is going to progress and look like over time. This also, making this transition to aligning with Oregon Strategy habitats will help with monitoring, not just in the MICA, but also help Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife as they monitor all of their progress, all of the easements in their program, and are able to report change over time more holistically. Next slide. Kind of puts a picture with the map of what those habitats look like on the ground. Riparian forest and seasonal ponds, the degraded riparian forest being the forest plantations. We're calling the reed canary grass dominated wetland areas degraded marsh, with the hope that they become healthy marsh someday. Next slide. And I thought these maps might interest you. It shows on the left is the current infrastructure. Largely the infrastructure in the conservation area is the trail with some benches and some signage. The planned trail map, with the help of our technical advisory committee, we came up with a couple segments of trails. The little map in the corner is what was shown as an exhibit in our conservation, this MICA's conservation easement. So it shows a number of trails that don't exist on the property, but because they're in the conservation easement, the city has the right to consider developing those along the lines that they occurred in the conservation easement. And so we're proposing moving forward in the short term, the near term, with implementing an unpaved trail through the forest plantation east of the main paved trail. Thank you. And also utilizing, there's a spur that is not an official trail, but it's pretty compacted and nothing grows there. And we're proposing going ahead and making that a formal trail in the short term. There's a green line on the west side. That is not a public trail. That's a trail that's being proposed for restoration and management access only. That would be closed to the public, but it is needed for restoration purposes and often management purposes to get up to that part of the conservation area, which is really not accessible now. And then the light pink dotted lines, those would be more mid to late term of this. This management plan is being developed for 2025 to 2035. And so later in that term, the city may consider through this plan whether they want to mow the blackberry and create some unpaved seasonal trails in those locations. Next slide. The plan lays out 7 main goals for managing the conservation area over the next 10 years. The first 3 really have to do with habitat, enhancing, learning about, strategizing around enhancing the habitat. Goals 4 through 7 have more to do, well, 4 through 6 have more to do with the public use of the site. And goal 7 is related to restoration and monitoring access while in making sure that there is public or health and safety around the industrial areas of the site when that activity is taking place. Each of these has a bunch of goals, a bunch of objectives and strategies attached to them, which are in a very neat and tidy table, which should be pretty easy to look at, hopefully, if I did my job right. Next slide. We put together a technical advisory committee in October. We had a series of 5 meetings and got a lot of really great feedback from the technical advisory committee on key updates to the plans. And that has all been integrated into this draft plan. Rob was on our committee, as were a number of city staff and then other state agencies, federal agencies. We had tribal representation and community groups, as well as our restoration contractor who's been working in the site for 10 years. And next slide. All right, so we are now in the public review process. The document's posted, ready for public comment. It's also going to be sent out today to the technical advisory committee for their full review of the document as well. Is a very long link, so I didn't put the link up here, but if you go to the City of Salem website and search for Restoring the Willamette River, you should find the page. The documents are posted there. Also, I'm sure that Jeff or Rob would be happy to share a link by email. And comments are due January 10th still? Okay, January 10th. I'm a day late in getting it posted, but we were hoping for a 30-day comment period, and that gives us just about 30 days. comments can be emailed to Jeff, or there's a way to comment online through the website. And we're available for additional presentations in December. If anybody knows of a group that would benefit from them, we don't have any more planned after today, though. And next slide. Okay, so since it is a long plan, I find it helpful when somebody asks me to review something, if they kind of point out the sections where I'd really like some feedback. And you're welcome. I hope you have time to review the whole thing, but if not, some areas that I would particularly point your attention to are the desired future conditions. Do those really reflect what the community's interest in the site is? Public access and recreation and the planned trails are the goals and objectives around those, and the description of how the site is used today accurate and reflect what the community needs are. Keeping in mind, we'll parse this out when we're going through comments, but keeping in mind that this is a conservation area, so there is limits on the amount of access that we can allow here. The goals, objectives, and strategies table, the current habitat conditions. Basically, if there's any errors on our emissions, if you're looking through those and you know that that's just not right, please do point that out. The baseline data is important. Opportunities, and then finally, opportunities for new partnerships and additional funding opportunities that we might have missed. This is a big area to manage, and it's all pretty much all the restoration work and most of the management of the site is done through grant funding. So this is a site that we could use a lot of funding, grant funding opportunities and partnerships to help make the management plan come to fruition. I think that's it. Next slide. So I am, Jeff and I are available for questions, and I'm sorry I ran through the presentation, but I know you had a long meeting already.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. Glad to see all the work being put on this. It's a really, really cool part of our city parks system, and an important discussion to have. So does anybody have any questions or thoughts for Jen on those updates?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm just really excited to see opportunities for more trail development within the MICA. I see people cutting off into the degraded riparian area, the old Christmas tree farm or whatever it was. It'd be fantastic to put some trails in there and get some positive use going in there. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
As a frequent user of the park, I'm very excited about that.
Nice, it's wonderful. Yeah, one of the things we talked about at the TAC meetings was that the amount of homeless camps that pop up in that area and the unauthorized use that happens in that area, it would be good to just formalize the trail so that would hopefully discourage other unwanted uses to occur there.
I know there's a number of interpretive signs around there, which are really nice, but I don't know if there's any that talk about the history and about how this place is special and different than the others, both the other sides of the park. I think people just sort of consider it a continuation of it, don't understand that it's a conservation area. I think that might make a nice sign.
Yeah, and I do think there is a sign, maybe it's before the bridge, before you walk over on the riverfront side. I'm not there. I agree, though. I would miss the signs that describe the value and difference of the park. So that should maybe, it'd be great to get a comment about that so that we can consider that. I mean, not that I won't, I might forget though.
Yeah, I think there's a new objective about environmental education and kind of bolstering programs generally with environmental education at the site.
How do I make the comment then?
Oh, you can email it to
me.
Jeff.
Okay.
I will
Thank
say
you.
we were just recently awarded a grant for $546,000 plus to do work in the conservation area, and some of that does include public awareness activities, so signage and some other things.
Along that line, Yola Bend Park belongs to Polk County at the far south of the Minto Brown. And that their boundary, right at their park, they have a very interesting historical kiosk set up with 3 or 4 boards that explain the history and actual photographs, aerials and whatnot. I find it fascinating. It's really interesting. So when I walk in the park, I like to see, well, what was here 100 years ago? And I can look at those park boards and I can kind of figure some things out, but more of that for the north end of the park would be fascinating. And I think it would help people understand the history and how Boise Cascade dealt with that area and even before. So I agree. I think the historical boards would be a good input.
Great, yeah, so perhaps including a strategy to update or include more.
Even what you had here was really nice. I didn't know a lot on that, so I appreciated that. So pulling from your own PowerPoint could be a good sign start.
Yeah.
Any more questions for Jen? I know we're getting close to 3 o'clock here, and so we got a few other items we got to get through, but any final question for Jen or Jeff? Great. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate the discussion. Next up, we have a committee research presentation from Vice Chair McDowell and Member Holland on in the climate-friendly transportation. So this is part of our research committees that I charged at the beginning of the year. We've had some delays in the presentation here, but this is, and I'm stealing a little bit of thunder from later on in the meeting, but this is Dylan's last meeting after several years on the board. So wanted to get his committee's input in here before he departs. So Dylan and Al, I will turn it over to you for any discussion you have on this particular item.
Well, yes, I guess we haven't had a chance to talk, I have it pulled up here. We had talked briefly before the meeting about whether, given timing, if it made sense. I have ideas, and at the bottom, there's a lot of things written out, and suggestions, but they're not as formal as I would like. And so my thinking was perhaps it would make sense to formalize that just a little bit more and email it out to you in the interest of time. And perhaps if folks would be interested, I could zoom in next month for a 10-minute presentation. And Al and I could give that where to have a little bit more polish into it. So it would save you all some time, add 10 minutes to your January meeting, and then have something to refer to.
We can work on it a little bit more and formalize some of this so that it's condensed to effective.
And not to kick the can down the road anymore, but yeah, I'm looking at time and thinking that it might make you all be a little more attentive. I will just preface by saying I think some of those conversations around aligning things like the sidewalk and crosswalk funds are some of the things I've been thinking about, as well as thinking about bids per project on the front end for some EV infrastructure and things like that. So have some ideas sketched out, and if folks are comfortable, maybe we'll do the email by the end of the year while I'm still a member, and then can invite me back in January. How does that sound, Keith?
That works for me, Dylan, if you're willing to do that. So thanks for that. Assuming no objections.
Yes, good.
And as long as Rob isn't objecting because he already knows we have 4 hours worth of stuff planned for January, then I'm good with it.
All I want is to be early in the agenda.
That's the last thing.
All right, well, we will move on then. Thanks for that, and we'll move on to the next item, which is a quick discussion on our 2024 annual report. And this is just looking for feedback from all of you to the staff on things that we should highlight in our annual report for this year and the work that we've done. And we'll look to approve an annual report at our January meeting. So I'll open it up for thoughts and comments. I think last year was the first year we kind of revised our approach to annual report, and I think we went with like a one-pager that really had bullet point kind of highlights of things we had discussed and accomplished and engaged with across. And so I guess and we received, from what I can recall from council, some good feedback on the annual report approach. And so I guess my default would be to proceed with that. With a similar approach for this year. But any other thoughts or comments? Go ahead, Dylan.
As I helped write a lot of that with staff, and it was much easier to pull together, and I think council read it, which I think is a benefit by having it be one page, as I think it was read more widely as a result, and I think it was a lot easier for folks to put together. So my suggestion would be to do that, and then Keith, you'll be presenting to council next month, I presume, about our activities. And when I did that, it was nice because I had, 6 or 7 bullets. Each one was a slide. I talked through them real quick, and it was a nice contained presentation.
Perfect. any other thoughts on approach to the strategic plan? Or I suppose, Rob, you're also maybe interested in any particular items that we should make sure are on there.
If anything new, anything different that you want, so, you know, any letters Brad wrote, we'll be highlighting, any actions Brad took, we'll highlight, but if there's any. You know, the Moss Adams slides that we pulled up earlier talked about statistics of like how much we met, how many meetings we held and all that, we could include that, if the board wanted to.
To the point of Moss Adams, I would, since we're already doing most of the things, it's nice for us to make sure that's really highlighted prominently in the report of, you know, Counselor Varney joined us for almost every meeting as our council liaison, and that we had presented to council last year, and we're here again, and, you know, one of the big things we got last year was being added to special order of business versus just being in public comment, so we formalized that, and so I think those process things and the lens that council is reviewing that is helpful to highlight, of actually we're trailblazing this as we speak, and look at us doing some good work. So it's a good opportunity to pat ourselves on the back a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, so, and council has noticed that, right? And I'm thinking back to some of the things we've done, and sorry if you can hear the infant screaming in the background. We'll get to him in a minute, but some of the things that we've done, in particular around the baseball field discussion and Bush's pasture, right? And I think knowing that some of the councilor comments of like of appreciation of how we engaged and provided our recommendations and thoughts to them on that, I think would be good to re-emphasize in terms of our engagement there. So
Are you gonna mention the park tour, because kind of the engagement?
that was the other thing on my list too, Jen, is the park tour that we did that I thought was really robust and well done, and engaging and educational for all of us, and how we engaged and how we learned about the various projects there and how that relates to the CIP work as well.
Well, it was well participated by the SPRAB members as well, so.
Oh, and then mentioning the Walk to a Park social campaign, and that's hopefully gonna become a standing thing, and that we were able to get counselors and others to engage, which is helpful.
Great. Well, if you have any more thoughts in the near future, I encourage you to email those into to you, Rob, or to Leanne.
Both of us, please.
Both Rob and Leanne, email in those thoughts, and we will look to have a draft of that for approval at our January meeting. And I think the last item, if I've kept track of our agenda here, is to approve the annual work plan. And our annual work plan is on page 12 in the packet of materials here. Rob is displaying it for us. I think we talked about at least some of this at the last meeting, if I remember correctly. And so,
and if I may, I did make an update on this version I'm showing. I did update the board composition for next year following city council's appointments on Monday. So we have, Mauricio, you have been appointed to your first term. Your first term was actually a partial term, so. And Al, I shared news with you earlier, and then Rick Hartwood will be rejoining, and then we have a new member, Sigrid Olson, who's been on the library advisory board for 7 years.
Excellent. Thank you for getting those elements updated. Excited to have those members returning, and a few new members to join us. Any comments or questions on this work plan?
One suggestion, we have city budget committee. I don't know if we want to call it a committee is my only thing. We had city budget committee. And I guess purely asking that from a logistical standpoint, if you call it a committee, does that change anything about quorum rules or anything like that? Or is it okay to just have it be chair vice chair? Okay, yeah, it's perfect.
We could rename it anything you'd like.
As long as you guys are okay with
I
that.
thought was city budget committee sounds like the city's budget committee.
Yeah.
So, I don't have any brilliant thoughts off the top of my head, but that was my only. It sounds like we're being appointed to the budget committee, and I'm
Review
sure I wanna-
committee or track monitoring. I don't know.
Revenue sourcing.
We could just delete the word committee and
city budget liaising.
Oh, I like that. There you go.
Yeah,
liaison.
There we go, the winner. Always a hard word to spell though.
I'm just calling you liaisons.
That works. All right, any other thoughts on this outline of things for us to
I just
do
gonna
and complete?
I'm gonna highlight, March is gonna be, we are inviting, ODOT to join us. And I anticipate we'll take up the entire meeting, basically.
Good foresight.
In terms of our 2025 meeting schedule, as it's stated there, we'll look to do that in January. I think I asked last meeting if anybody had any particular conflicts with this hour, and I think Zachary has mentioned a conflict potentially with some teaching schedule that he has next spring. And so we might be just looking to make a tweak to our hours here on starting time for Thursday afternoons. Okay, well, if there's no other discussion, I will entertain a motion to approve our 2025 annual work plan.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Dylan, second by Al. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All
Yeah.
right,
It'd be.
motion passes, I think. Some confusion in the room, motion passes.
We weren't sure if Adrian voted in favor or against.
Oh, great to know. He's about ready for his nap. All right, board member updates. I want to acknowledge, as I mentioned a little bit, this is Dylan's final meeting after 6 years on the board and a few stints as chair and vice chair. It's also Joan's last meeting after 3 years on the board, I believe, right, Joan?
Yes.
And so I wanted to say thanks to both of you for your service on SPRAB and give you a chance if you'd like to say anything about your time and service on the board. Dylan, I'll turn it over to you first.
Yeah, hard to believe it's been 6 years. It's been really, really exciting. It's been a wonderful opportunity to work with you all, and I've really appreciated how active staff is in this process. I think a lot of you know, I grew up in Oregon, moved to DC for about 4 years, and then when I came back, moved back to Oregon and in Salem, I really wanted to get involved in the community, and this was a good fit, and it's just been a really good opportunity to kind of, I love being in the parks, and I love all of our recreation opportunities. So I have enjoyed this a lot, and I'm just really proud of where SPRAB has come. And when we get the feedback from council and from city manager that, we are kind of a shining light in the boards and commissions space, that's been a big priority of mine. And it's been really fun to see everyone jump on board with that. I think it's made a real impact, and it's really, I think, added a lot of value. It's given me a lot of reward. I became chair in February of 2020, and Jen very nicely got me a little gavel that I got to use exactly once because the pandemic hit about 3 weeks later. And so it's been a fascinating time. I think during that time, though, we all really underscored the need for parks and recreation, and COVID and the pandemic and everything with the budget conversations. I think the community realizes how essential this is, and I'm hopeful that will continue to be a priority in the budget and all of our conversations. I will continue to be an advocate for Parks and Rec. I won't go far, still be out there, and now I'll be coming to your January meeting, so I can't fully get rid of me. But just really grateful. It's been fun, and I appreciate how engaged staff are. I think you all do a really good job of being very realistic and pragmatic, which is appreciated. I think it really helps us make good decisions and gives us the ability to know, is this actually something that's going to make sense, or is this just a non-starter for a variety of reasons? And to me, that's one of the secret parts of this, where sometimes you get staff in different cases that are maybe just saying yes to something and it might not go anywhere. Other times there's just no's. And I think you all really do work to say, we like this concept, how would it make reality? And that's created a good environment that you fostered, where I think hopefully we've made your jobs easier in some cases, provided feedback that's meaningful. And I think the park system, doing better than it ever has in terms of engagement from the public and from what I see and appreciation. And we have some budget things to figure out, but we're lucky to have as many parks as we do. And I hope to see things like the neighborhood engagement and the walk to a park stuff continue, because the more we're out there, the more we're talking about it, the better it will be.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dylan. Joan, would you like to say anything?
It's hard to follow.
It is. I thought of that after I said that, Joan, so sorry for putting you.
No, it's been an honor to be on this advisory board. I haven't really added much to the conversation, but I have learned so much. It's a huge, huge job. And we have dedicated and committed people, Parks and Recreation, with Rob and Jennifer. And thank you so very much for everything you do. And their presentations are always good. So, and I do, again, I second that about community engagement with the surveys and open houses and all that. And it's hard to please everybody, but you seem to do a really good job. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Joan. Been great to have you both and work with you both on this board over the last several years. Any other board member updates about other general items? Okay. I have a couple, I think, well, Rob already gave us kind of the appointment committee and their motions on who our new members will be and Alan Mauricio being reappointed. So looking forward to having you guys rejoin as well as our new members coming in. We will, with those new appointments in January, look to appoint officers, the chair and vice chair. With Dylan heading out, that opens that up, and my term as chair is up. And so if you are interested in either of those positions, be thinking about that, and we'll look to do that at our January meeting. I think that's all I have for board member updates. Any discussion on information reports, which we didn't have any?
Can I make an announcement just real quick?
Please.
The city manager's office wanted me to share that on Monday, December 16th, from 6 to 7:30, there's going to be a reception for the outgoing mayor and the departing city councilors, and it's open to the public. So it's at the library in kind of the plaza lobby area. So if you're available and want to attend to say your goodbyes and stuff, it's an opportunity. And you're certainly welcome to share the specifics relative to the reception with whomever. So
Thank you.
Again, date and time again, please.
it's Monday, December 16th from 6 to 7:30 in the library kind of lobby area.
All right. Any other items for us to discuss or be aware of? Okay, well, thank you all for your patience with me as I've managed this guy throughout our meeting here. Sorry I couldn't join you all in person, but hope you all have a good Christmas and holiday season, and we will see you in January.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adjourned.